Hi everyone, my name is Jen Blue, and I am here today to share my perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement. And I am sharing this perspective from a first, where do we start? So, within society, I am a white Caucasian woman. My first marriage was an interracial marriage. My child is a multiracial child. And he holds melanin. He holds melanin in his skin. He's a person of color. If we want to, go into these ranges, so that's what they are. They are within the construct that we live in, that we breathe in, that we exist within. He is what you can call a Black Indigenous person of color. Now, I had not come across that term until a few years ago. I was quite ignorant to racism. For a long time, and eventually I came to know and understand racism on a very deep level. But the various reasons why I was ignorant to racism, you can imagine how that must have had an effect on my many things, right? Being in a interracial marriage. Growing up in a racist suburb outside of Detroit, post riots, post white flight. My grandparents on my mother's side were Polish Americans, first generation born here. My grandmother on her side held, see, I have a little bit darker of a skin tone, some melanin, and I remember growing up and hearing stories about how they used to call her Blackie. On top of growing up in Hamtramck, it's a Polish area in Detroit. During, over the World War, she would have been born sometime around World War I, World War II, my grandmother. My grandfather, I have been told that, I knew him, but he was going back a generation further. Based on ancestry, he was, my grandfather was a self-made man. He was a self-made man. He didn't come from wealth. Neither did my grandmother, but from what we gather, she would have held more wealth. Right? My grandfather, no. He was a hard worker. And he was a self-made man. Right? He made it. He made himself. Like, we're talking parents dying while he was, during the Depression, parents dying, and he had to take care of his family. And he very quickly, created a lot of wealth. And at some point, my mom came along. She grew up in Detroit. They didn't move. I guess, it would have been around like flight time. They moved to Grosse Pointe. If you've ever heard of Grosse Pointe, just imagine that. Detroit riots. My grandfather held a lot of property. Not in Detroit, but just everywhere. Maybe he did help the whole property in Detroit, but I don't remember. But he eventually bought up land and made killing, which he then kept reinvesting. Smart businessman. I grew up with that. Owned his own business. I feel like I'm going back really far, and I don't want to go too far out. That's my mom's side. Racist family. I grew up in a racist family. I can say that. Because it's my family. Right? No, I have recognized that this has nothing to do with me. I just was born into this family. But at the same time, it had an effect on me. It had an effect on my marriage. I didn't... It had an effect on my nervous system. When I realized this, because I came to a point where I was... wherever I was, I don't know. And I realized that I'm going to have to raise my son on my own. How do I fill that space? How do I fill that space? How do I ensure that my son does not pick up on anything that my mother is saying, because it is so ingrained in her? She loves my son. She loves Miles. But I'm going to tell you, that shit is still inside of her. And I have seen it. And I have witnessed it. And I grew up in that. Right? And I have healed myself of that. But it still exists within my family. And I have to protect my son. Just like I always protect myself. Right? That's what mothers do. Protectors. But what has helped me is understand, right, this whole thing. We have to start here. We have to start somewhere, right? So I'm sharing it from my perspective and what I have lived through. 38 years old. So I grew up in Grosse Pointe, right? I remember at 5 years old when I was in kindergarten, and I had my first black friend, Cheryl. Um, and my grandmother told me, just don't marry one. Like I needed permission. Right? Now that would have obviously had an effect on my child's mind development and how I view the world and how I relate to it. Naturally it would. That is my grandmother. Now, I have traveled back to that moment to see myself that maybe doesn't hold that programming, you could say. Now, it's not that I ever embodied it. I've never been racist, you could say, overtly. But I still had my own internal shit going on. And I'm not saying I haven't been. It's not fair. You know, I hold white privilege unconsciously. I am sure I have harmed a person of color. I take ownership of that. Based on my white privilege, based on my neglect to understand another's experience. Now, I can tell you that I've always had black friends. Ever since kindergarten. But you don't think that, let's just say, right? You can see that. That had an effect on me. Right? Somewhere, right, I held that position, right, in my field that there was something wrong, you know, like with it or something like that. Just that little impression. They're big, impressions like that, and then of course everything else that backs it up, right? And that's where I remember I'd leave my grandmother's cry, my family's, that side of the family, I'd like want to leave crying, like it was just, but it was always, and it wasn't just, it was all races, right? Jews, blacks, Arabs. This fear, this distrust, another, right? That's America. That's America. Do you see? That's the reality. That's the reality. Yes, there is America the Great, America the Beautiful. But we are still reaching that potential. Because we have injustices to serve. Individually, collectively, we have work to do. We have work to do. And for me, somebody who never thought in a million years I'd ever go to a protest or be a radical, considered maybe by some, I don't know, activist, whatever it may be. Ever. Democrat was a bad word in my family, and believe me, and I was a college Republican. I was a hot mess of Jen. I was all over the place. Dating black men. Giving my parents trouble. I had a lot of things going on. But I wasn't healed. Right? I wasn't healed. So I brought all that baggage into my first marriage. Now, my son's father, my ex-husband, is not a part of the picture. Miles has made that decision for now. And it's not good. So I know that I have to take a role here. I don't have to. But this is my duty as the mother of a child of color. That's my space. That's what is necessary for me to educate myself, to learn, to understand about racism. And all of that education and that learning I have gained, I have adhered to or brought in to my intelligence range. It all aligns to experiences I have actually had in witnessing racism. I have worked in racist environments. I have seen racist practices all the time, behind the scenes, within my experience. So to say that it doesn't exist is profound. We have all been witness to racism. And we all know it still goes on some level or another. It's just our choice whether or not we're going to allow that in. But it's happening irregardless. And your attention is simply being brought to it at this time. It's been happening. It's always been happening. It's just your psyche wanting to deny it because it's going to open up a can of worms. You don't want that, and so you suppress it, right? And it's happening within what we see, what we experience. Right? So when we allow something to be, like another's experience actually to be legitimate, regardless of, to just listen to their story, to hear. And I'm not saying that you haven't had, troubles, or we've all had our shit. But we all gotta go through our shit at this time. And when people go through their shit, people realize that if they don't take a stand, and if they don't do something, and they don't bring light or awareness to something, and justice, and time, and energy, and focus, and mission, effort, movement, then we will remain in that same reality. So that is why we have BLM. The origin points of BLM, Black Lives Matter, is in 2013, and this is directly from their website, This is their story. This is their origin point. This is about taking back to this origin point. And we're going to go into that. In 2013, 3 radical black organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created a black-centered, so this is about centering black people, because that's who they're serving, black people. Political will, right? So they have a will and they have a voice and they want to share that. And movement building project called This Means. This is action based because of, we'll get to that in a second. So it's a black-centered political will and movement building project called hashtag Black Lives Matter. This is its origin point, these 3 women. Now, this was in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. Now, if you remember Trayvon Martin, he was a young black boy, minding his own business, walking down the street with a hoodie on and Skittles. Eating Skittles. And I think he had his phone, and George Zimmerman, this white male who was on a power trip, shot and killed him. And he went to court and he was acquitted. Later on, George Zimmerman was wearing his Confederate shirt, signing Skittles packs. So it goes to the very nature of the man. I don't think anybody could deny that he was racist, and so therefore racism was a part of the equation in many forms. Perhaps not prematurely thought up, however, very much motivated by toxic masculinity. This, I'm going to take things into my own hands. This so-called justice system. That's the distorted, let's say the distorted. But there's also, there is a way to hold justice within your system, within your beingness. We'll get into that in a little bit. But this is obviously, there's a fault here, because that's not justice being served. No way, no how. Where's the justice? For people to bear witness to this, imagine yourself as a black person. Now imagine that rage. Another one acquitted. Another injustice. Once again. Mind you, this is a peaceful movement. Can you imagine the restraint needed there? I just want you to feel into it a little bit. That's all I'm asking. Just feel into it. The passion, the fortitude, the determination. This is about the murder of somebody's child, somebody's young boy. And then to witness that injustice over and over and over and over again. Like, let's go back to this space. Okay? Without needing to look at what's happening, let's say, with George Floyd and his previous arrest record, all of that. Let's just look at this. Let's hold space with this. Because the truth of the matter is there is so much misinformation out there and bullshit. It's all a fucking mess. I mean, like, I can't even keep up with the messness. And this is somebody who has the mindset and the ability to handle a lot of incoming stimuli and put a lot of pieces together. I worked in watch centers. I worked in fusion centers. I know how to filter information. Very quickly, I know how to feel into things. I know how to recognize things. I know things. Right? I just know. You have an intuition. You have a knowing. These are feminine traits, and while they may not be honored within some circles, they exist. And when I feel into this movement, I feel that this is necessary and that this is a aligned movement. When I feel into this, when I feel into the heart space, this is needed. It's needed. We can hold space for this. We can trust our Black brothers and sisters to not to love us, maybe. To hold space for us within their whole. This isn't a separatist movement. This is began by 3 women who were tired of this. You know? We're tired of this. And how can you say anything negative about that? I mean, you can, put up walls and shit like that, but it's just... So that is where Black Lives Matter originated. It's my experience of racism in this country. I mean, I'm not gonna share, other people's stories. I can't do that. But I bared witness to it in so many different spaces. And I held space for my coworkers who experienced it because they were my brothers. Right? Wherever that may be. I mean, it's there. It may not be overt, but it's there. It's behind the scenes. It exists. Whether you want to believe it or not, it exists. And it needs to be dealt with. It's got to stop. It's got to go away. So how are we going to do this? I mean, for me, because it all starts with me. It all starts with you. That's it. It's where the change starts. It's not with anybody else. It's with you. How do you create that change? What has this meant for me? It's changed my whole life. It's changed my whole perspective of things. Where I'm going and how I create and how I manifest and how I, spend my money and because I'm aware, and so I want to offset maybe some of these. How do I do my part? It's as simple as that. When you're in awareness, it's how do I do my part? How do I take up space? How do I take up space? Whatever that may be. And so, within that, it is necessary for things to begin earlier on. I don't know if that's just a message to me, or so things need to begin earlier on. So within that scope, I consider myself a BLM activist. I am out there. I am out there activating people into their own wholeness and their own understanding and their own ability to see things truly as they are. And how do I do that? Because I present myself and I say, look, this is my story. This is my experience with racism, my relationship with Black Lives Matter. And I have really looked deep into Black Lives Matter, and I don't feel it to be anything other than what it says it is. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be, right, with anything. There's always going to be something that's true and something that's false, you could say, or, there's always going to be this, but the beautiful thing is that this is a social movement. That's really what Black Lives Matter is. The protests are just symbols, right? The real protests, the real movement socially, it's this changing of hearts and changing of minds. The coming together. The unifying, because I can hold space with another who's having an experience, and I can hold space for that, I mean, my background, right? My background would normally be like, oh God, But I chose to explore this movement fully. I wanted to understand it. That's what you do. When you truly want to understand something, you gotta go in. And you gotta go in deep, and you gotta understand it at its core, and what is it here for? How does it work? What is the system? That's my feelings. It is a changing of hearts and minds, and that's what, at its core level, right? It's not about anything other than that. If you're able to look outside your bubble and into integrated spaces, you will find that. And I feel that that's the key there, is to, for many, it's the getting out of your bubble and just, going into some, spaces that are, talking about this stuff. I'm a part of this group called White People Doing Something. And, some of the stuff in there, I'm just like, oh shit, man. Because I just see distortion. When I look at things, I only see distortion usually. But, when things are really clear, usually I'll come into a space and I'll just be like, holy shit, look all this stuff going on in here, right? But, it's happening. That's all I'm going to say. It's happening. And it happens, like, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about all of it. All of it. We have to understand that that's a common history. Of people, of the American people. So seeing outside of that, white lens, my son's school has something called Colonial Day. And I knew the moment I heard it, I said, shit, that's cultural appropriation. And I said, and I had learned, about cultural appropriation on some level, but I didn't quite understand it, and I didn't have the capacity to speak to it yet, or to it just wasn't time yet. But it's Colonial Days. It instantly gave me no, because it's essentially a bunch of kids running around. You got you can be either a pilgrim, or we won't even get into the word Indian being used, but a pilgrim or a Native American. And it's just, why aren't we teaching children? And I'm not saying you teach, but why are we not teaching children about cultural appropriation? Why are we teaching children truly about why do we even have Colonial Days, really? I just feel like things just need to change. This binary, this black, white, everything's just got to restructure. But if, I'm planning on making some change. And I'm planning on speaking out about it. And I'm just going to put it out there. I'm just going to say, look, I think it's cultural appropriation. What can we do about it? Why is that so hard? Why did it take me so long to just figure that out? I don't have to figure everything out. I don't have to figure out all the solutions. Let's just start talking about it. The solutions will come. But it's giving over our shit. Right? All this compartmentalization, all this dysfunction, all this... and just free ourselves of it and just say, you know what? Things just need to change. So let's just talk about these things. Let's be a democracy. Let's be a democracy in every single level and every single space. Because that's what democracy is, a process. And you have to all be, and I'm not going to say you have to all be Democrats, right? But on some level you kind of do. Everybody's got to be a Democrat and everybody's got to be a Republican, right? You have to understand that we are not just, when I think about political parties, I could never place myself into a political party box ever. maybe when I was in college and I was a college Republican, and because I grew up in Republicanism and yay Reagan and all that stuff, but I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I mean, but I do believe that we need to exercise our rights as citizens in order to, and it's not even about that, well, it is on some level, but it's also about just, let's all just start talking. Let's see what happens and let's bring everything there. It doesn't have to be some, all we have to do is hold space and talk about things. But the only way we can hold space and talk about things, is if we all get through our stuff. So that's why all this stuff is happening. And then once we start moving through this, we get to the other side, then we can understand things. That's all it is. It's understanding things at fundamental levels, understanding how we can all just live in harmony and peace, and how we can respect one another, because it really is about respect. Somebody tells you something's cultural appropriation and they are of another culture, then maybe it's cultural appropriation, or maybe you should at least look into it and educate yourself, right? Rather than just knocking it as liberal or left or, you know what I mean? That, right? That, like, just blocking it out, like not even allowing it in. Because that is what you could call really you're doing harm to another person when you're dismissing them. Now, that other person most likely has dealt with it, before, but that is, and in of itself, the problem. We have to treat each other with respect. We have to treat each other as equals. And I'm not saying it's not always, I'm not saying it's always easy, but if we could just get down to fundamental relationship dynamics, having healthy relationships where we can, work together and come to common places of understanding and peace and harmony and working together as a whole. And can you imagine the world that we could create? Not that far off if you really think about it. You just gotta take those steps forward. We all have to, and we're all there, right? We're all creating this new planet. So let's do it. Let's just keep moving forward. Right? But this is Black Lives Matter. My relationship, my connection to Black Lives Matter. I hope that was dynamic. I hope you all have a lovely evening. It's evening right here. Just until next time, toodaloo.